So hi everyone, good morning or good afternoon actually. Thank you all so much for joining us today for the unique needs of kinship caregivers. And my name is Cassandra Mendoza. I am one of the training coordinators at the Texas Institute for Child and Family Wellbeing. And today we have Nalkaja Graves, who is the Permanency Resource Specialist at the Texas Alliance of Child and Family Services. And today she's here to share about her work with working with caregivers. And so we're really excited to have her here today. So thank you so much, Nalkaja. For now, we'll just have Nalkaja go. She'll present, and then at the end, we'll leave a little bit of time for questions. But if you have any thoughts or comments, please feel free to add them to the chat. We'll be monitoring the chat as well. So that's another way to engage. And then if you please want to introduce yourself so we know who's here. But thank you all so much for being here today. And Nakaja, go ahead and take it away.
All right, thank you, Cassandra. And thank you everyone for joining our webinar today over the unique needs of kinship caregivers. So just a little bit about myself. I am been in the field for about 15 years now, and I've worked very closely with kinship families, and kinship is very dear to my heart, as I grew up in kinship care, raised by my grandparents, and was also a temporary kinship placement for 4 cousins of mine that were actually taken into CPS custody. So I can talk about kinship all day. However, I only have an hour of you guys' time. So thank you all for joining us to learn about the unique needs of kinship caregivers. So our training objectives for today are to learn about the kinship care in different types, also identify fundamental clinical issues for related caregivers and how they can impact kinship placements, as well as gain knowledge and skills that can be applied with kinship caregivers to support strengths and challenges during the assessment and placement process. So let's just start off with a high-level definition of kinship care. So according to the Child Welfare League of America, kinship care is defined as the full-time protecting and nurturing of children by grandparents, aunts, uncles, godparents, older siblings, and non-related family who is also considered fictive kin, as well as extended family members and anyone to whom the children and parents ascribe a family relationship. So now let's discuss some of the benefits of kinship care. So some of the benefits of kinship care are it minimizes trauma. So many children and youth who live in kinship arrangements have experienced traumatic events such as being abused or neglected. So being removed from the home is often a traumatic experience as well, and children may suffer the losses of their parents, friends, neighbors, and schools. So when children live with kin, they are often able to maintain their connections and familiar supports, which can reduce the trauma and removal and help the child heal from their past trauma. Then we have preserving their cultural identity. So with preserving their cultural identity, living with kin helps children preserve and strengthen their culture by maintaining connections to their communities and culture, including their language, food, and holidays, such as things like that. And then it also improves placement stability. So children in kinship care who are less likely to experience many moves in various foster homes and families as children in traditional foster care. Then it also improves behavioral outcomes. So children in kinship care can display fewer behavior problems than those in traditional foster care. And then most importantly, it promotes sibling ties. So kinship care increases the likelihoods that siblings will remain together and connected with one another. So these relationships that children have with their brothers and sisters are often the longest relationships that they will have in their lives. So now let's identify the different types of kinship care. So technically, there are 3 different types of kinship care. So you have informal kinship care, which is care without child welfare involvement. Then you have voluntary kinship care, where Child Protective Services is involved, but the state or the tribe does not have legal custody of the child. And then we have formal kinship care. And this is when the state does have legal custody and places a child with a relative or kin in a foster care arrangement. So now we're going to take a deep dive to go into each three types of kinship care. So with informal kinship care, majority of kinship care arrangements occur outside of the child welfare system. So this is where families kind of work together, and this has happened over decades, where you see grandparents or cousins or neighbors that just take in the children and organically just care for them without having to involve child welfare. And informal arrangements are often made by family members without child welfare involvement. So just as I discussed, where the family is able to work it out with other family members or fictive kin members or extended family to be able to talk through arrangements on their own of how they will care for the child as a family without having to technically, call on CPS to help the family figure out how the children should be cared for and kept safe and have their needs met. And then also with informal kinship care, birth parents retain legal custody of the children and can take them back at any time. So with informal kinship care, there's no regulations or stipulations around the birth parents' involvement, and they are able to be involved in the children's lives and come and go as they are able to, and be able to support their children while they are being raised by their family members or fictive kin members. So now let's talk about the strengths and challenges of informal kinship care. So some of the strengths are protection for children prior to significant trauma occurring, also family preservation without system involvement, and then the power of the caregiver's voice. So whatever the caregivers that are caring for the children, whatever they feel is best for the family, they hold all that power and are able to make that decision along with the birth parents. And then also more natural supports are more intact. So that's where you see with informal kinship care, they may literally have a village, a network of family members, friends, the community that are all intact and really come together to help to be one big family to provide the needs for the children. So what are the challenges with informal kinship care? So establishing legal rights to the child, boundaries with the birth parents, awareness of resources and services available. So there are very limited resources for informal kinship caregivers. And then isolation. And because informal kinship caregivers are limited on resources and available services, this type of kinship care can be very isolated due to their limited access to resources and services that are available to them. So then we have voluntary kinship care. So with voluntary kinship care, in these cases, the Child Welfare Agency has determined that the child may live safely with relatives without further monitoring and oversight. And therefore, the agency does not take responsibility for the care of the placement of the child. So depending on the state and the circumstances, the legal custody may remain with the parents, or the parents may also sign over temporary custody. And this is referred to as temporary guardianship to the kinship caregiver. So now let's discuss the strengths and challenges of voluntary kinship placements. So some of the strengths are ensuring safety. So with ensuring safety, caseworkers may ensure that the home meets minimal requirements for safety for the children. So for instance, most states require that the caseworker conduct a criminal background check and also a child abuse and neglect registry check on all household members that are living within the home where the children are placed. And then also visitation. So caseworkers may periodically visit the home to ensure that the children are maintained in a safe environment. And caseworkers may also support the kinship caregiver during visits. And then also offering services. Services are available for children and families in voluntary kinship placement. So this might include referrals to therapy or support groups for the family member. So this is where the difference from informal versus voluntary is that the caseworker that is working with the family is able to connect the family to any supports and resources that the family may need to help better care for the children. And then also changing the custody status. So if children remain in the legal custody of their parents, but the parents are not meeting their service plan requirements or placing the children in dangerous situations, caseworkers may help kinship caregivers petition the court for temporary custody of the children. And also caseworkers may go to court and petition to have children placed in legal custody of that state. And then some of the challenges are limited resources for kinship caregivers. So even though there are some resources available for voluntary kinship placements, they are very limited and sometimes not as accessible as they are for like traditional foster parents or formal kinship caregivers, which we'll touch on here in a bit. And then also qualifying for government assistance. So the government assistance would be TANF or SNAP. So even though these are voluntary kinship placements, they still may not meet the requirements. And that can sometimes be a hardship on the family because they still do not qualify, even though they are bringing in, they do have additional needs. However, they still may not qualify for government assistance, and that can be a big challenge and is a big challenge for kinship caregivers because they will need that extra income and assistance to be able to provide the care that they need for the children. And then another challenge is collaborating with the birth parents to meet the children's needs. So this can be very challenging for kinship caregivers in voluntary kinship placements because it just depends on where the birth parent is with their recovery, where they are with their resources or getting the help that they need to better help care for themselves. So this collaboration can be very challenging with voluntary kinship placements because there's no court order in place and the state is not involved with mandating that the birth parent help out that kinship caregiver in the way that they need to be able to help, kind of work as a co-parent to be able to co-parent with meeting the children's needs. So collaboration with the birth parents in voluntary kinship placements can be very challenging at times. So now let's discuss formal kinship care. So in formal kinship care, this is very structured and CPS is heavily involved. So the state has legal custody of the children and the kinship caregiver is given the option to become a licensed foster home. So what are some of the strengths and challenges of formal kinship care? So some of the strengths are families are connected with child placement agencies to become a licensed home. And then after the licensure requirements are met, foster care placement occurs and the licensed caregiver begins to receive monthly fostering connections benefits. The child placement agency provides ongoing support and resources while the home is licensed. And then with legal custody, the kinship caregiver is then provided the opportunity to have custody transferred over to them because the state does have a TMC, which is temporary managing conservatorship of the children while they're in custody. However, once the case is ready to reach permanency, for formal kinship placements, once the home has become licensed, they can either receive PMC, which is permanent managing conservatorship, or adoption. So that's where legal custody is definitely a strength of a kinship, formal kinship placement. However, there are challenges with that. So the challenges are the licensing process can take a long time. caregivers' homes may not meet licensure requirements because, again, the kinship caregiver is having to follow the same requirements that traditional foster parents have to follow. Then also caregivers have the expectation of traditional foster parents. So since their home is getting licensed as a licensed foster home, they have to stay in compliance with state regulations. They have to stay in compliance with the Child Placement Agency's policy and procedures. And that can sometimes be very challenging for kinship caregivers. And then also birth parents are not allowed to visit the licensed home if they are not able to pass a background check or if a court order is not approved. So again, that's the big challenge in my experience in working closely with kinship families and providers is that just the licensure process and the home being treated as a traditional foster home, even though these are relatives. However, the good thing is Texas is working on kin-specific licensure requirements. And at the Alliance, we have a kinship collaborative group. And I am a part of that group. And we are definitely working with the state and the federal level to be able to get kin-specific licensure requirements so kinship caregivers are not having to meet all of the same requirements that traditional foster parents are. Because when they're not able to meet those requirements, then that's when children are sometimes having to be placed in different placements outside of the kinship caregiver's home, all because the kinship caregiver is not able to meet those requirements. So we are working really hard and advocating for kinship specific licensure requirements. And like I study this stuff all the time. I'm such a big geek whenever it comes to anything with kinship care and making changes for kinship care to be able to be more accessible for families and children. And Washington has actually adapted their kin-specific licensures, and a couple of other states are working on that as well. So hopefully Texas will join that as well. And we are working on that, and it is coming down the pipeline. I mean, we are really advocating to make sure that kinship caregivers are not having as many challenges as they are to be able to successfully get through the licensure process to have their home licensed. So now let's discuss some of the clinical challenges for kinship caregivers. So some clinical challenges for kinship caregivers are loss, redefining roles and boundaries, embarrassment and guilt, transference and projection, split dual loyalties, anger and resentment, child rearing practices and responsibility, morbidity and morality, overcompensation and compensation, fantasies, and redefining roles. So I want to just take a minute to kind of touch on each of these challenges just to kind of give you all examples of what we are referring to with these clinical challenges for kinship caregivers. So as it relates to loss, kinship caregivers experience multiple losses. For example, interrupted life cycles and postponed plans for retirement, delayed goals, intrusion of privacy and space. So changes in the caregiver's roles and relationships with the child and the child's parents. Then redefining roles and boundaries. So this does not occur with respect for the child, but also for the child's parents. So relationships with the parents are redefined as a kinship caregiver undergoes a transformation from the supporter to the primary caregiver, and also from the advisor to the decision maker, as well as from peer to authority figure. And children may have a difficult time adjusting to these changes and roles and boundaries, as well as their parents. And then when we say that they experience guilt and embarrassment. So this is especially for grandparents where they wonder if the parents' problems are a result of their own failure. So contributing to the family disruption by accepting the parent's child into their home. And the kinship caregiver may also feel guilty about being able to care for the child better than that child's parent. And then as it relates to transference and projection, This is where there are unresolved issues with the parent that are then projected or transferred onto the child. And then with split and dual loyalties, this is when the caregiver must place the needs of the child before the parent. So can you imagine how difficult that would be for a grandparent to have, they're torn. The grandparents are torn because they're like, my grandchild needs this immediately. However, my child is needing help with recovery, with finding a job. So the kinship caregiver, they really feel split between their responsibilities and their loyalty to the child and the birth parent. And then also anger and resentment. So this can arise or be directed at the child, the parent, professionals, or the agency themselves. So this is where you can see kinship caregivers may have a hard time for the professional to connect with them. And that's because they do have feelings of anger and resentment because they may be having second thoughts of why does our family even have child protective services involvement? Where have I failed to where I have not been able to keep my family from having to have child welfare involvement? And then you have morbidity and morality. So some kinship caregivers have potential physical and emotional effects, as well as limitations of aging. And this should not be overlooked. So some elderly caregivers may not live long enough or be physically able to be there long-term raising the child, especially when there are young children involved. So that's why it's very important that kinship caregivers have a contingency plan in the event that they were able to not care for the children because of some type of physical complication that happened unexpectedly, or even in the event that they were to pass away. We definitely want to make sure that there's a backup plan, that there's a contingency plan, so that the child does not have to then enter foster care because their current kinship caregiver is no longer able to care for them anymore. Then we have overcompensation and compensation. So kinship caregivers feel extreme sympathy and empathy for the child and the parent. And this makes them feel that they must make up for the child's losses or trauma in doing so by overcompensating them. And then we have fantasizing. So the kinship caregiver always fantasizes and have hopes that the parent will be able to get their children back. And so this is something even in, my personal experience. When I did have my cousins in custody, when I was caring for them, I always had hopes that my family member, their mother, would be able to get her children back, because I really felt that even though they were with family, but the children just deserved to be with their mother. And not to mention, I was a college student caring for 4 of my cousins. So definitely, I know that would not work out long term for me, but I was really working hard to keep my family within the family and my cousins not have to go into foster care and just really preserve the family arrangement, to not really have to have my cousins exposed to child welfare. So I really did have high hopes of their mother getting her things in order to be able to get her children back. And that's a lot of kinship caregivers have shared that with me all through the years that I've worked with them, that they really, even though they're excited that their relatives are placed with them, but they are really looking and hopeful for that child's parent to do everything that the judge court orders them to do, and that they really hope that they comply with what CPS is asking of them, so their children can be returned back to them, because they really do believe that their children should be with their parents. And then you have refining relationships. So development of parent and child relationships is facilitated by the child's perception of their caregiver as a provider who is the protector, self-sufficient, and authoritative. So to successfully assume a parental role, the caregiver must obtain the child from the dependency, respect, and confidence for the kinship caregiver as a protector, provider, and authority figure in the parent-child relationship. So what are some strategies of how professionals can help kinship caregivers? So creating room for the grieving process and address their losses. So talking through with the kinship caregiver. So when having conversations with them, just allowing space for them and be able to ask them questions such as who is less able to help themselves? Whose turn is it now? Do you see where you could lose both the child and the parent if you try to save them both? So really just taking the time to slow down and allow the kinship caregiver time to grieve, because this is a loss that they are experiencing. So it's very important that professionals are taking the time to talk through with the kinship caregiver of, these are, just some examples. You can definitely use, different questions, but these are just some examples of some questions that professionals can ask kinship caregivers when first starting to work with them, because you definitely want to allow them time for the grieving process and time to address those losses. Then also prioritizing responsibility and loyalties and not humiliating the parent. So you want to assist the kinship caregiver in coping with the loss that they have experienced by allowing them to express themselves. So really giving them that space to have a safe space to be able to listen to them and prioritize their responsibilities, because it's very challenging for kinship caregivers to have this conversation with the parent, to have this conversation with another family member, because they all may not be on the same page of what's going on with the family. So that's where the professionals, that's where you come in, playing that mutual party of allowing them that space to be able to cope with the loss and um, not really humiliate the parent, because that can happen a lot of times and does happen whenever children do enter child welfare, where in child protective services becomes involved, is where the parents can definitely be humiliated, and a lot of negative stigma goes around the parent and why the parent should not be involved, because they shouldn't have done X, Y, and Z for their children to be taken away from them. So definitely that's where humiliating the parent can come in. But you have to keep in mind with kinship caregivers, these are their relatives. So we do not want to provide a space where they are having to humiliate the parent or be embarrassed of the choices that their relative has made, or the challenges that they may having as to why Child Protective Services is now in the picture and have removed the children from the parents. And learning to accept new roles and forgive themselves. So validate and acknowledge the feelings of the kinship caregiver's guilt. And then also taking time to listen to them and really focus on their needs. And so much focus goes in on the needs of the child. So we do know that the children are at the center of decision making and planning. And that's why all the professionals, the kinship caregiver, everyone involved, we're all coming together to make sure that the children's needs are met. However, with kinship caregivers, it is very important that we do not overlook their needs, just as with traditional foster parents, but even more so with kinship caregivers, because we really need to make sure that they are connected to resources, so they have what they need to be able to better care for themselves. So in the result, that they can be the best kinship caregiver that they can be to the children placed in the home. So it's very important that we are giving just as much time and talking with the kinship caregiver about what their needs are, and not only identifying those needs, but also connecting them with resources for any needs that they may have. And then also help withstand the process of intervention. So allow the family room to breathe when the family intervention process becomes too much. So families, kinship families can definitely be overwhelmed when they have a lot of professionals coming at them at one time. So we have to think about it. Um, their family has not always had CPS involvement. So whenever Child Protective Services becomes involved, families have to deal with a lot of professionals. You have to deal with judges, attorneys, mental health professionals whenever mental health needs are involved, um, the school system, the child placement agency for formal kinship placements. So life is very different for them. And this is for both the child and the kinship caregiver. And this can be even more so overwhelming for the kinship caregiver because the kinship caregiver is the one that has to keep up with all of these people, has to answer the phone every time they call, has to return emails, text messages, has to sit in on meetings and adjust their schedules. If they're working, they may have to take time off of work. Anytime professionals are working with the intervention process to come in and provide support services to the family, you definitely want to be mindful and kind of slow down. And I do understand as professionals that we do have timelines and checklists and things that we have to get in within certain times, but you want to be mindful of the kinship caregivers, especially if they are expressing to you, or you're getting that feeling that they are overwhelmed, or they're asking you, can we please reschedule this visit because this has been a heavy week for me. So allowing them that time and that space to be able to adjust to having all these professionals come in and out of their home and be so involved with helping the family. Also allowing them the space to vent. So allowing them the safe place to vent and not take it that this is an angry kinship caregiver that is just overwhelmed and can't do it and they want to give the children back. And so that is very important for professionals that are new to working with kinship families, are, if you may not have worked with a coworker or had a family member that has been involved with Child Protective Services, sometimes the kinship caregiver just needs room to vent. And to someone that is new to working with kinship families and are really just starting to understand them, it can come off as if they're complaining or they don't want the children there. So that sometimes can then be misinterpreted and can be added in a court report or documented in a caseworker's contact progress notes that the kinship caregiver is frustrated. They appear, they make comments that they want to have the children removed from the home. Sometimes they just need time to vent because this is very overwhelming for them, especially if they did not have time to prepare for their relatives to be placed with them, and they're kind of like getting things together as they go. Sometimes they just need that space to vent. And even though they may have other family members, friends, co-workers, or neighbors to vent to, those other people may not be supportive of them, and they may be giving them negative feedback and make comments like, well, you know what, you should just let the kids go into the system because it's too much for you. You work too much. You only are a single parent household. You only have one, your car is not big enough to transport 4 children. All of those things, they can sometimes be negative if their support system is not in favor of them keeping the children, their relatives, in their home. So with the professional, that's where you come in, being non-judgmental, which goes into our next process is listening to the caregivers without judgment. So not judging them and kind of putting yourself in their shoes and saying, okay, if these were my relatives, if I was this grandmother, this aunt, this uncle, this cousin. I just need someone to vent to because I'm very overwhelmed. I did not expect all of these changes to happen, but I know my priority is to keep my relatives in my family. And I have a lot of things that I have to figure out. And that is okay. Sometimes it takes us time to figure things out. We may have to write things down. We may have to talk things through with other people of what that looks like. And that's where professionals, that's where your role is so important, is being able to be non-judgmental and kind of put yourself in that kinship caregiver shoes and be able to help them come up with solutions to whatever barriers that they may be having of why they feel that this may not be a good fit, or needing to be connected to resources or supports that will help them be able to care for their relatives, so they will not have to be placed in an unrelated placement. And then just some fun facts that I wanted to share with you all is some famous people that were raised in kinship care. So Oprah Winfrey, who is a big media mogul. Then you have Bill Clinton, who was our 42nd president. Then Simone Biles, who is the greatest female Olympic gymnast and also a Houstonian. Then Maya Angelou, who is a poet and author. And then our 31st president, Hoover, I'm sorry. And then the famous Coco Chanel, fashion designer. She was also raised in kinship care. And then also Tammy Baldwin, the United States Senator. And then also one of our former first ladies, Miss Nancy Reagan, was also raised in kinship care. And so here are some resources. So you can take a screenshot of them, but these are some of my really good go-tos whenever I'm doing research or putting reports together over kinship care. These are my go-tos. So definitely the Child Welfare Gateway, Generations United, Dr. Crumbly, who is like the godfather of kinship care. And then he also offers a lot of things on YouTube and has a book that you can get off of Amazon that is very inexpensive. And then also the American Bar Association, where I've referred a lot of informal and voluntary kinship families to, so they can be able to kind of see what legal rights that they have, because sometimes kinship families are not able to afford to speak to an attorney, and because they're not in formal kinship care, an attorney is not assigned to work with the child, so they are not able to kind of ask those legal questions. So the American Bar Association has been very helpful and provides free resources to kind of be able to break down the legal aspects and rights that kinship caregivers have. All right, so thank you. And that was just a very high-level overview of the unique needs of kinship caregivers. As I said, I could go on for hours and hours just discussing the unique needs of kinship caregivers.